One of the most painful things narcissists do in a relationship is something that looks almost invisible. They stop talking, they stop responding, they disappear emotionally while still being there. Suddenly the messages stop, the affection stops, the connection disappears, and you're left staring at your phone wondering one simple but incredibly painful question: what did I do wrong? But here's something important. Most people don't realize the silence was never about communication, and it was never about solving a problem. For many narcissists, silence is a form of control. If you've experienced the silent treatment, you probably remember exactly how it felt. At first, you tried to fix things. You asked what happened. You replayed conversations in your mind. You tried to understand what you might have said or done wrong. And the more silence you received, the more anxious you became. Because silence creates something incredibly powerful. Uncertainty. You start questioning everything, your words, your behavior, your intentions. You wonder if you accidentally hurt them. You wonder if you should apologize. You wonder if the relationship is about to end. And that emotional confusion can become overwhelming. The silent treatment is not just a random reaction. In many narcissistic relationships, it becomes a psychological strategy. When someone refuses to communicate, they create an emotional imbalance. One person becomes desperate for resolution. The other person holds the power of response. And this imbalance can slowly shift the dynamic of the relationship. Because the person experiencing the silence often starts working harder to restore the connection. They apologize more, they compromise more, they try harder to keep the peace. Meanwhile, the narcissist learns something important. Silence works. It creates anxiety. It creates emotional pursuit. And it reinforces their sense of control. Here's the part most people don't understand. For many narcissistic personalities, emotional reactions from others are a form of validation. When someone chases them for answers, when someone tries desperately to restore connection, it reinforces their sense of importance. And silence becomes a powerful way to trigger that reaction. Because silence forces the other person into a state of emotional uncertainty. And uncertainty often leads to pursuit. You reach out, you ask questions, you try to fix the problem. Even when the problem was never clearly explained. Think about the emotional energy that silence can create. The long hours of waiting, the overthinking, the tension that fills your mind. You start imagining scenarios. You wonder if they're angry, if they're leaving, if they're punishing you. And during that time, the emotional weight of the relationship shifts entirely onto your shoulders. And this is why it hurts so much. Because healthy relationships rely on communication. When something goes wrong, people talk, they express frustration, they work through conflict, but the silent treatment removes communication entirely. It replaces dialogue with emotional distance, and that distance can feel incredibly painful, not just because of what is happening, but because of what is missing. Clarity, understanding, resolution. Over time, many survivors realize something surprising. The silent treatment was never about solving problems. It was about avoiding accountability. Because silence prevents real conversations from happening. It prevents responsibility from being discussed. It prevents emotional repair. And instead of resolving conflict, it simply transfers emotional pressure onto the other person. Maybe you remember trying everything to break that silence, sending messages, asking if they were okay, trying to apologize even when you weren't sure what you did wrong, hoping that if you just found the right words, things would return to normal. But the truth is, when silence is used as control, there are no perfect words, because the goal was never resolution. The goal was emotional power. But there is another layer to the silent treatment that many survivors only understand later. Because silence doesn't just create distance, it creates emotional instability. When someone suddenly withdraws communication, your brain begins searching for explanations. You replay conversations, you analyze small details. You wonder if you misunderstood something, and slowly, something subtle begins happening. Your focus shifts. Instead of evaluating their behavior, you begin evaluating your own. You start asking questions like, was I too emotional? Did I say something wrong? Did I push too hard? And that internal questioning can slowly lead to something incredibly damaging: self-doubt. Here's the part most people don't understand. The silent treatment often works not because of what the narcissist does, but because of what it makes you do. You start chasing clarity. You start trying to repair the connection. You start taking responsibility for emotional problems you didn't create. And over time, this dynamic can reshape the entire relationship. Because the more someone withdraws communication, the more the other person tries to restore it. And suddenly the relationship becomes unbalanced. One person controls the connection, the other person fights to keep it alive. But the silence can become even more confusing when something unexpected happens. Because after days of distance, sometimes the narcissist suddenly returns as if nothing happened. No explanation, no acknowledgement, no discussion. They might speak casually, send a normal message, act as if the silence never occurred. And that moment can feel incredibly disorienting. Because part of you feels relieved. The tension is gone. The connection seems restored. But another part of you feels confused. Because the emotional pain you experienced was never addressed. And this is how the silent treatment slowly becomes normalized. The silence appears, then it disappears. And the relationship continues as if nothing happened. Until the next time conflict appears. And the cycle begins again. But here's something important many survivors realize later. Silence is not emotional maturity. It's not conflict resolution. It's emotional avoidance. Healthy relationships do not punish communication. They rely on it. Healthy partners express frustration. They explain when something hurts them. They work through disagreements together. But the silent treatment removes that possibility entirely. It replaces communication with control. And over time, that control can make the other person feel emotionally powerless. Because every disagreement carries the threat of emotional withdrawal. Every difficult conversation risks triggering another period of silence. And eventually, many people begin modifying their behavior to avoid that outcome. They speak less openly. They suppress their feelings. They walk on emotional eggshells. Not because they want to, but because they want to preserve the connection. But here's the truth many survivors eventually discover. When communication disappears, connection slowly disappears with it. Because intimacy cannot grow in silence. Trust cannot grow in avoidance. And emotional safety cannot grow where communication is used as punishment. Understanding this can become a turning point in the healing process. Because once you recognize the pattern, you begin seeing the silence differently. It no longer feels like a mystery you must solve. It becomes a behavior you can observe clearly. And clarity removes something very important from the dynamic: confusion. When confusion disappears, something powerful takes its place: awareness. And awareness is one of the most important steps toward emotional freedom. Because once you recognize unhealthy patterns, you become far less likely to tolerate them again in the future. Understanding this changes something important. Because when you realize silence was a strategy, you stop blaming yourself for it. You stop replaying every conversation in your mind. You stop believing that the relationship would have been peaceful if only you had behaved differently. And instead, you begin seeing the pattern. You begin recognizing that healthy communication was never truly present in the relationship. And that awareness is powerful because once you recognize a pattern, you can choose not to repeat it. Healing from narcissistic relationships often begins with understanding what you experienced, the confusion, the emotional highs and lows, the silence that made you question your own reality. But as clarity grows, something else grows too. Boundaries, self-respect, emotional awareness, and slowly the patterns that once kept you stuck begin losing their power. If someone used silence to control you, remember this: your voice deserves to be heard. Your feelings deserve acknowledgement. And healthy relationships never require you to beg for communication. Real connection does not punish vulnerability. Real connection values openness. And as you continue healing, you will begin recognizing the difference. If this video helped you understand something about your experience, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we talk openly about narcissistic relationships, trauma bonds, and emotional recovery. Because understanding what happened to you is the first step toward emotional freedom. And remember, you survived the relationship. Here, we help you survive it too. And if you've ever wondered about something else, why do narcissists blame you for everything that goes wrong in the relationship? The next video on this channel explains why narcissists shift responsibility and make others feel guilty for their behavior. And once you understand that pattern, even more pieces of the puzzle begin to make sense.